Welcome back to La Pausa, a Pints and Punditry podcast here at the Pitchside Pub. It is Monday, April 8th. This is episode 20, and the Premier League season is winding down, and the race has gotten tighter than ever. After Liverpool dropped some points over the weekend, Arsenal now takes the lead. They are in the driver's seat. They and Liverpool are tied. Manchester City is 1 point off the pace. And we've got a wild race that's going to go down to the finish, and it's absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to say the thing that nobody wants to admit, but we have profit and sustainability rules, formerly FFP, to thank for this race, because as fucked up as this process is, and these penalties are, and as terrible as the system is, it's working. It's working, and that's what nobody wants to admit, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me down below. Make sure you get in that comment section. Tell me how wrong I am. I don't care. I believe this firmly. Follow me on Twitter. You can yell at me on there as well. And if you haven't checked out the new website, go ahead and do that, pitchsidepub.com. We launched that this week. I got a link down in the bio. We're going to have blog posts expanding on some of these topics, talking about some different topics that we don't get to in videos. Sometimes these videos take a long time to make, so I'm going to crank out some blog posts to get some thoughts out there that just don't quite fit on Twitter, so make sure you check that out, pitchsidepub.com. So, profit and sustainability rules, they're working. They're working because if they weren't, we wouldn't have this race. Now, I want to go on record, okay? I want to make this very clear. The process by which these rules are being enforced, and we had Everton get docked today again for a second time. The process by which these rules are being enforced is fucked beyond belief. It is fucked three ways to Sunday. It is absolutely atrocious. There should be lawsuits. The clubs, even though they agreed to this, should be foaming at the mouth. They're so angry because these rules are not new. It's just the enforcement of them that seems to be just activated this season. It's also the timing. It's the fact that these things happen mid-season. It's the fact that these penalties are coming down with 7 games left in the season, and you have so much hanging in the balance. It takes away from the fans' enjoyment. Are the final results on the final day going to be final? Is any of this final? It's like VAR, but magnified 100 times over. It's awful. It is diminishing the product. And the execution of it should be illegal and should be challenged in courts of law, which will, of course, only make it uglier. That said, it is accomplishing one of the goals it set out to do. From my understanding, FFP, and now we call it PSR, had 2 goals in mind. One was to keep clubs from overspending to a point that they got to financial instability and eventually bankruptcy, which is what we call it here. We call it administration in England, apparently. But it was to prevent clubs from themselves, right? It was to keep them from making those mistakes and spending so much money with trying to get to the dream of the Premier League that they overspend beyond their means, and then when it doesn't work out, they can't function. They're out of money. They can't pay their payroll. They can't do any of the things you need to do as a business. It doesn't appear to be really achieving that goal because it's all the bottom of the table clubs so far that have been penalized, who are obviously spending beyond their means to attempt to stay in the Premier League. That's what Nottingham Forest did after getting promoted. And by penalizing them, it's only going to make it worse, right? They're going to end up getting relegated, which is going to cost them a ton of money. They're going to have to sell a bunch of players off. It's going to set them back for years. So clearly the penalty was not enough or was not functioning as enough of an incentive to not do the thing it's trying to get you to do. So in that aspect, it has failed. However, by beginning to actually enforce it, it scared the shit out of the big clubs, right? And one of the other goals was to create more parity at the top, to allow for more clubs to compete for a title. There is a problem in European football of nation states coming in and purchasing teams. And I recognize that I root for a team that has one of these ownership groups. But I want regulations. I don't think that just because Manchester City is owned by a oil-rich company that they should be able to spend unlimited dollars. No, that's not fun. That's not fun to root for. I want Manchester City and Newcastle and any of these other clubs to have to play by the same financial rules as everybody else. And again, I'll go on record. If and when the 115 allegations that everybody loves to bring up anytime there's a points deduction, even though it's apples to oranges. When those come down, if City is proven to have broken rules, they should be penalized, and probably pretty aggressively. And if they go down to League Two, I'll follow them there. I'm all for the rules and the enforcement of the rules and an even playing field for everybody, because when Manchester City wins, I want them to win on an even playing field so everybody can shut the hell up about how they just bought titles, right? So I want the even playing field desperately. So I love seeing these finally enforced, but it's working. And all you need to do to look for proof is to look at the table. Arsenal 71, Liverpool 71, Manchester City 70. You cannot tell me, and you will not convince me otherwise, that if they had not started to enforce these rules this season, that we would have this level of parity and this amazing 3-team race that we are going to have down to the absolute wire. You cannot tell me otherwise, because Newcastle would have kept spending, right? They spent a ton this season. They may have to sell Alexander Isak, which would be a travesty for them, because he's a fantastic player and he's the reason they're in 8th place and not lower with all the injuries they've had. But they may have to, because they are up against some FFP, barometers, and they're afraid they're going to get penalized because they spent and spent and spent. And that was the fear when they were purchased by the Saudi Arabian government, for lack of a better term. The fear was that they would just be able to spend unlimited amounts of money and dominate the Premier League, and it would be them and Manchester City, and everybody else would be fighting for 3rd place. Well, that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened, and PSR is the only reason it hasn't happened, because, let's face it, Newcastle came in and started to do that, and they spent a ton of money, and now they are afraid of punishments. So it's working. It's a terrible, terrible system and enforcement, but it is beginning to work. The fear is beginning to work. You can't tell me Manchester City would not have spent differently this past offseason and would not have spent more during the January transfer window, or would have spent something during the January transfer window, because they didn't do anything, if they weren't afraid of similar kinds of punishments. You don't think they would have gone over the top and made sure they got Jude Bellingham some way instead of Matthias Nunez and Mateo Kovacic and Jeremy Doku? As much as I love Jeremy Doku, you don't think they would have held on to Cole Palmer? No, he wanted out, and they knew they couldn't give him the playing time, but they also knew they could get a lot of money for him and that they needed midfield depth. But if they had no restrictions, they have the money. They have unlimited money, right? So if there were no restrictions, they would have said, "Oh, Cole Palmer, you are one hell of a backup, and you'll play some. And Jeremy Doku, we don't need you. And Kovacic and Nunez, yeah, no, we don't want you. We want this Jude Bellingham guy." And yes, even though he wanted to go to Real Madrid, they would have made him some sort of godfather offer that, for $500,000 a week wage or something ridiculous. And they certainly would have had a better chance, is my point. I don't know how it would have played out, but they would have had a chance. Maybe they'd go get Frankie de Jong from Barcelona. They would have spent differently, right? They went for middle of the road, mid-priced by their budget, depth in Kovacic and Nunez and Doku, instead of massive names and massive price tags. And frankly, that may have been better for them, to be honest. Sometimes these rules save these rich clubs from themselves. Chelsea, I'm looking at you. But you can't tell me they would not have spent a little differently, or that they wouldn't have added somebody in January, right, to replace Calvin Phillips, who's been worthless, or to give them some sort of extra depth, another defender, another fullback, all these fullbacks that they've been linked with. You can't tell me they wouldn't have gone after somebody, right? Chelsea would love to keep spending, but they know they're up against it. They're going to have a massive sale this summer. They're all afraid. Which means it's working. And look beyond the top 3. Let's look to next year. Let's look to next year in the Premier League. You can viably say that there are 9 clubs, almost half the league, that have a chance to compete, to actually win or at least be in the top 4. That's what I'm calling competing by these standards. Next year, there are 9 clubs that I've identified that can viably and legitimately compete for a top 4 spot in the league. And there would be 10 if Brighton was willing to spend any of the money that they have made from sales. Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City, Tottenham, Villa, United, West Ham, Newcastle, Chelsea. That's the top 9 of the table right now. Every one of them has the financial resources to compete. The only thing stopping some of them is competence. Chelsea, Manchester United, right? But it's not resources. They both got the money. They're just run incompetently. But Tottenham's got plenty of money. They're back. Villa and West Ham, there's no reason they should have to go away. They're making plenty of money from the league. They're going to get some European money this year. They've got the resources to compete with the big teams. It's no longer a big 6. It's like a big 9. And again, Brighton ought to be there too. They've made so much money from selling players over the past couple of years that if they reinvested it all the way they should, and their fans should be very angry, but that's a different video that'll get me yelled at, they should be right there with them. There's no reason they can't compete, for that top 4 spot as well. So you've got 9, almost 10 teams. That's half the league that can viably say they have a chance to, if not win it, certainly be in that race. That they could be in that, 80 to 85 point range at the end of the season. That's fantastic. That is a wonderful, wonderful thing. There are not that many easy games on the schedule. When you look around, yeah, you've got your relegation battles, but even that middle of the table, nobody wants to go to Wolves, right? Going to Crystal Palace, that's a tricky one. Fulham's beaten just about everybody at some point over the past couple years. They can be tricky. There aren't a lot of easy teams, a lot of easy games on the schedule. Brentford, who's sitting in 15th place and has been a little bit of a mess the second half of the season, but they were sitting in the top half of the table last year. It's so deep. The league is so deep because there's so much money to go around that's getting actually spread out the way it's supposed to. But more importantly, they can't overspend. The really rich clubs cannot overspend. So financial fair play, profit sustainability rules are starting to work. Now, they absolutely need to be revamped in terms of how they are enforced, when they are enforced, the consistency with which they are enforced. All of it is just terrible. And that is a massive black mark on the league and on the success that it is actually having. It vastly overshadows the fact that it is working to a certain extent. And because I rarely hear this, which is why I wanted to talk about it. It's been given no credit for actually getting things in order, and rightly so. The execution of this is pure trash. And the fact that Everton has 2 separate penalties, and I understand they're from 2 different accounting periods, but the fact that they're both being enforced in the same season is just ridiculous in terms of the spirit of competition. It is taking away from the spirit of competition. The Premier League should be, and when it's run right, is one of the best competitions in the world in terms of pure sporting competitions. And as you get more financial parity, it will only get better. It'll only get better. It has established itself on the top of the European pyramid, for lack of a better term. It is far and away the best league in Europe, competition-wise, talent-wise, but it's being run by a bunch of idiots, frankly. It's being run by a bunch of businessmen who are not in line for the spirit of the competition. They are in line only for profit and sustainability, and that needs to change. So I will do another video on changes I will suggest. I have a lot of ideas about this. As a little teaser, I will say I don't understand why teams are allowed to break the rules and then are punished. I am not here to Americanize the European game. Even as an American, I think most of what European football does differently than America is right. Promotion and relegation and a lot of other things. No draft system. I think it's so much better than American sports in most ways. But this concept of letting teams break the rules and then punishing them after the fact is asinine. Make the rules. Tell them how much they can spend, and then they can't spend more than it. And it's not that you get punished for doing it. You simply can't do it. And I'm not suggesting a luxury tax, and I'm not suggesting a salary cap. Both of those are absolutely terrible and will be addressed in other videos as well. But there are ways to fix this without ruining the fact that it is beginning to work. So I do want to give credit where it's due to profit and sustainability rules. It is working. Look no further than the table and the fact that we have a wonderful, amazing 3-team race for the top. And then you've got a good solid race for the 4-5 spot with Tottenham and Villa. I'm looking at the table here right now. And then that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is Man United to Chelsea down at 9 is 5 points difference. So for that 6-7 spot, it is a massive race too. You've got a lot of parity going on, and it is due to the fact that teams are finally afraid to overspend, and you have to give credit where it's due. PSR, get your shit together, figure out how to assign these rules, assign these penalties in a more timely fashion, in more fair ways. By all means, by God, figure out what you're doing with Man City, because it is dragging on and it shouldn't be drawn into Every single case. It has nothing to do with Everton. It has nothing to do with Nottingham Forest. It has nothing to do with Chelsea if they get hit or Newcastle if they get hit. You can't stop penalizing other teams just because the City case is exponentially more complicated and is going to take something to figure out. But by God, assign some people to it and shit or get off the pot with that one, because it just hangs over everything else you do, and all the lazy pundits out there love to bring it up as the low-hanging fruit. Every time somebody else gets popped, you want to dock Everton 2 points. What about Manchester City? Get over it. It's apples to oranges. It's a totally different case. PSR, go figure that out so we don't have to deal with this anymore. But don't ruin the fact that you have actually curbed the spending by some of these clubs. And that's the other thing, is they are now discussing changing some of these rules with this luxury tax to undo it. Don't undo this part. It's starting to work. Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. Don't let the wealthy clubs like Manchester City come in and bully you into changing it. And Manchester City owners, stop. Win the league. Win a more fair league, right? Manchester City is so well run, managed well, organized well. I'm talking off the pitch. Now, I'm not even talking about Pep and his staff. I'm talking about their front office, their scouting directors, their football directors, their operations are the epitome of what every club is trying to do. It's why their guys always get poached. That's why Manchester United is basically trying to copy them. On a level playing field, you should still be the best. And then nobody can discredit your championships. So stop trying to skew the rules in your favor. If I'm Manchester City, I say, give me all the rules. Give me all the rules, restrict everybody, because we're still going to beat you. And that's what I would be doing if I was running Manchester City, but I'm not. I'm sitting here making a podcast. So get in that comment section down below. Let me know what you think. Let me know how wrong I am about certain things. That's fine. I'd love to hear your opinion, but you're not going to convince me that PSR is not leading to an awesome title race, because it has curbed some spending for some big clubs who would love to have done what they could do to pull away from this race. And instead, we got a great race, and it's going to be awesome. Make sure you follow the channel down below. Hit that subscribe button for me. Follow us on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. And of course, if you haven't already, check out the website, bookmark it for me, pitchsidepub.com. We got lots of good content that's going to come on there as well. Thanks as always for joining us on La Pausa, a Pints and Punditry podcast here at the Pitchside Pub.